filled our minds with the various theories on post-truth and falsehood. And today, we have him here with us again to further expand our knowledge on spatial theory. Over to you, sir.
Now, let me thank Dr. Shobna, head of the department, and her colleagues in the Department of English, students and research scholars for this opportunity. I thought I would focus your attention on space, and space as a critical category. We know a lot about time. We have heard many lectures. Perhaps we have read many books on time. But space as a critical category has always eluded our understanding. Every time we discuss a piece of literature, we essentially discuss literature in terms of space. But today, we talk about multitude of spaces. Perhaps I will share with you. Okay, so today we'll discuss space. Now this is a unique one in literary discourse, and I thought it deserves. It hasn't received the attention it deserves. And of course, our perceptions of space, or what we call distances, have changed. And we talk about shrinking global and cosmic distances. In other words, space remains a physical thing as well as a mental thing. Because space is something that is outside of us, and space is something that is within our mind. And how we think in terms of space. So the literary space itself, as we all know, it accommodates geographical space to social space and ideal space to ideological space. Now, geographical space, yes, we know, we think in terms of our planet, our globe, then we think in terms of the place of our planet in the solar system. Then we also think in terms of our solar system in the Milky Way galaxy and so on. And we have billions and billions of stars. And certain things are beyond our comprehension. For instance, we are not able to understand the exact distance of spaces, or the exact distance between planets or galaxies and so on. Somehow or other, we try to understand the world in which we live, or the planet in which we inhabit. And we know, as humans, we have almost measured the entire length and breadth of our planet. And we have also come to believe, and we also think in terms of latitude and longitude, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, and so on. And even we have divided our planet into two equal halves, with the equator as a center, and so on. So our understanding of the space, though it is limited, we have expanded our knowledge of space. Till today, we don't have any theory or analytical study of space. For instance, we have a lot of descriptions of space and inventories of what exists in space we have. So we use certain terms synonymously. For instance, we use terms like spheres, sites, domains, fields, scapes, thoughts, and even the word place. So though we use many of these terms, the term space remains distinct, accommodating all this. Each word is clearly nuanced, And a sphere is certainly different from a site, and a site is different from domain, so and so on. So we'll try and understand space. And the earliest work on space was by Gaston Bachelor, who wrote his Politics of Space. So we have this whole concept of felicitous space as well as a hostile space. The society in which we live is very much a felicitous space, meaning we are surrounded by our family, friends, and we occupy a space that is free from hostility, violence, and as a result, this space we all come to love. It may be, our home or our workplace, where we move around easily and freely, mingling with others, because we humans as social beings, we regard ourselves as part of this space which we live, in which we live or which we inhabit. So Gaston Bachelor, he even talks about space within a home. Sometimes we use the term home as the most preferable space for a human being to live. Anything we call home. So a place that we return to live, sleep, eat, and so on. So he calls this a felicitous space. A home is a felicitous space. And he talks about even within our home, there are nooks and crannies, there are rooms and things like that. For example, dryers, chests, wardrobes, shelves, cellars, corners. Some of us have preferable corners in our own home where we go and sit and we sip a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or we take a book and we read. So there is this concept of house and universe. So for human beings, the world is our home, the entire biome, our living space. We cannot live elsewhere because the climate in which we live, or the earth in which we live. See, here we have air, water, and we belong to this place. This is our home. For all human beings and all creatures on earth, this planet Earth is their home. And we can also even extend and talk about the entire universe as our home. Now, take a quick jump from this conceptualization of space to something like Arjuna Apathi's classification of postmodern space. He talks in terms of scales. Some are visible, some are invisible. For instance, Arjuna Apathi, he talks about ethnoscapes, the place where we live. People who belong to certain ethnic category. For instance, people who speak Tamil, or this is a Dravidian group of ethnic category. We inhabit mostly the southern part of India. We have even drawn maps. We have even created boundaries, and we have claimed this to be our living space or Lebensraum. So he calls that ethnoscape, the place where we have located ourselves. We may migrate, we may move out of this space, but essentially we call this our home, our land, our town, our village, and or our home, and so on, or our neighborhood, and so on. So he uses the term Techno State. People living in different parts of the world, living in certain lands where they are predominant, their number is predominant, where they live in large numbers. This is a visible space. Now look at, he calls that ethnoscape. Look at medioscape. But remember, this ethnoscape is not a pure scape. Sometimes we have migrants, we have people from other parts, And that is why a lot of social tension, it creates a lot of social tension or even political tension. This ethnoscape is different. Then mediascape. What is mediascape? The world itself becomes intelligible to us only through this mediascape. Say, we watch television, we read newspapers, we take our mobile phones, and we try to understand the world in which we live. Now, mediascape it is a medium. It just informs us what happens, even in the place where we live or outside the place, and even people, men and or what we call men and material, or people and material, become knowable to us only through a mediascape. For instance, the face of Vladimir Putin is familiar to us than the face of a neighbor who lives 5 or 7 homes beyond your home. Why? Because of this media bombardment of images, we are exposed to these images and figures. As a result, these people appear more familiar to us than anyone living in our neighborhood. Mediascape and its role is not limited only to bring knowledge about people living in other parts of the planet. It also includes entertainment, films, music. There are many things to that. A mediascape, it is a different scape altogether, into which we make a journey now and then, but return to our ethnoscape. We don't remain in the mediascape all the time, but we return to our ethnoscape. Then there is something called Techno State. This is the term used by Arjuna Pathare, one of those foremost critics living in our world now. So Techno State, it is a scape where technology can be located. Our factories, machines, sometimes even our industries, organizations, our research labs, and so on. So we use the term technoscape. Even your ATM, your bank, that is the technoscape, where you employ technology in order to get something done, or you use this technology to create something, like producing electricity or supply of water, and so on. It is basically a technoscape. So the technoscapes are there, scattered in our midst. The world in which we live, they are there, and they provide jobs, they provide our livelihood. Sometimes they shape even our entire civilization. Their civilization is determined by the technology that it uses. In ancient times, people used stone as a tool to conduct warfare, or even iron to make tools and things like that. So now it is one form of technology. The technoscape determines our civilization, and even it determines our civilizational values. So these scapes and technoscapes are spread all over our countries, all over our planet. Then something like a finance scape. Now, this is a transaction of money, commerce, and also a transaction of large scale business, and where money gets exchanged. So, finance scale. Don't think it's only about banking, insurance, and commerce alone. Even we use our mobile phone to transfer money through Paytm or even through GPay and so on. We pay money to people, we pay our bills, many things. That is a different world where money is transferred from one place from one person to another, or from one bank to another. There are so many things to the finance scape. And the finance scape is a very important scape. Say, during this Ukraine and Russian war, this has come to the fore. So this is also a theater of war, so to speak. the finance scale. So the Western nations, including EU, that is European Union, they have blocked all money transactions and business transactions. And they have essentially stopped anyone from exchanging money or doing business with Russia by blocking all those banks. So this is also one form of warfare, a financial warfare that happens in a finance scale. Then the last one is an ideoscape. Now, what is an ideoscape? Ideoscape is nothing but the kind of ideology that we use, the thought, or it could be a doctrine, or it could be a thinking, or it could be a principle. It could be anything that shapes our mind, that shapes our values, that shapes our nation. For instance, in our constitution, it is enshrined that India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. These are the things that should determine our national way of life, our whole way of life. The Westerners are accused as capitalists, or some people are accused as socialists. Some people are called secularists. Now, what do we mean by this? It simply means there is some ideology. Even if you claim that there is no ideology, it is also an ideology. So the ideoscapes also proliferate and they are spread all over. And it differs from nation to nation and it differs from people to people. In certain cases, religious ideology is also predominant. For instance, a country like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where the Sharia law is in force. Now, you may call these nations as theocratic nations. Essentially, a religious ideology that is used to control as well as to shape the lives of people. In other parts of the world, people claim it is secularism, that is an ideology that is used. You go to China, China is a very, it calls itself a communist nation, but very much involved in capitalist activities. So it is a what we call the fault lines in China between communism and capitalism. They are fractured, so fractured, and they have this fractured ideology. It is not exactly a communist nation in and out, and it is not exactly a capitalist nation, but capitalist forces are there in China. Now, there are capitalist regions like Beijing, Hong Kong, or even Macau. There are many places where the international business thrives and local business also thrives. Okay, so now have all these things at the back of your mind. I also want to focus your attention on what Merleau-Ponty has to say about the foundation of space. He uses the term point horizon structure. That is, there are multiplicity of points or spheres. Say, for instance, if you look at the number of pixels, if you look at a photograph or a photo, you talk about a photo that you send or you take in terms of pixels. What are these pixels? These are all small dots, multiplicity of dots. Similarly, he talks, it's not the same, I'm analytically speaking. There is something called point horizon. Say, our body moves in space. Say, it is an empty space. Even I try to move my hand, there is space outside of me in which my body moves or my hand moves. Look at a dancer who dances on a stage. And when the dancer dances, he or she keeps moving. And where does he move or where does she move? in space. So now the space of your occupation keeps shifting from one point to another, one point to another. And Merleau-Ponty is on record saying there is this fundamental relationship between our body and space. So we talk of everything outside of us in terms of space. I move on to the next one. There are a multitude of spaces. There are geographical spaces, economic spaces, which I have already pointed out, demographic, where a population lives. Recently, there was a discussion about conducting a census based on caste in India. Now, some people oppose this as dangerous. Conducting a census where a particular population lives, a particular caste lives, a particular tribe lives, or a particular group of people live, or groups of people live. Then there is something called social space. Very interesting space. That is the social space, which we have inherited from our forefathers, in which we live. But the social space is not a permanent one. It is fluid. As we migrate and move. For instance, there are students living in hostel in your college or in any college for that matter. So they have temporarily, removed themselves from their living space to another space, and they live there for some time, but that is also a social space where there is a lot of social activity. Now look at the students from India who have gone to Ukraine for higher studies. They have all temporarily shifted to Ukraine or to the US or to any part of the world for higher education. And people also migrate or move in search of jobs. So the social space keeps shifting and it keeps moving. Many people say this social space provides us with some kind of mobility. And it provides us with, mobility. Now, and this mobility is sometimes, what we call this mobility is sometimes curtailed because you cannot travel from India to Sri Lanka, you cannot travel from India to a country like Dubai unless you have a visa, unless you are given permission. You cannot move from one space to another because in the name of nation, even our social space is curtailed. Then the ecological space. It covers the entire planet. And it may be local, it may be national, or it may be global, or it may be about the oceans and the seas, the forests, the mountains, and so on. The ecological space. The political space. Okay. So this morning I read in the newspaper, one of the political leaders from Tamil Nadu. Now he has challenged another political party. You cannot claim yourself to be the third strongest party because your political space is limited only to Kanyakumari district. You have won a few seats there. That's all. And you cannot call yourself, you cannot talk about your presence in the whole state, and you cannot claim yourself to be the third largest party. It's an interesting one. So even the political space is limited to certain regions, certain pockets, certain constituencies, and so on. Then the commercial space, every city has a commercial space, media I have already explained. Then we also think of space in terms of national proportion or continental proportion and global and even cosmic. But we will come back to the small spaces, as we call that. It is also known as specialized spaces. We go to certain places for our leisure. Some people have even a second home or a third home. They have their own farmhouse, as they call it, a place meant for leisure, or it may be a hotel, right? Or it may be a tent which you pitch because on top of a mountain or inside a forest because you love hiking and love travel. It's a space meant for leisure. There is a space, there is certainly a space meant for work, play, and even transportation. It is the space that moves. Foucault talks about this heterotopia. It is very interesting to know any transportation, whether it's a bus or a train or a plane or anything, or even your own car. It is a small space, but it's a moving space and a movable space. So, very interesting. Then all your public facilities, right, like your hospital, hotel, and anything, or your schools, colleges, all are spoken of in spatial terms. So now you have this macro space as well as your micro space. We will look into each one of them. First, we'll take a look at the social space. Now, Emil Durkheim is on record talking about social reality. So what we call social reality, according to him, is nothing but an ensemble of invisible relations. So ensemble means it's a collective. So all our lives are interrelated. Everything is related to everything else. Our school, our college, hospital, the shopping mall, the roads that we travel, right? So everything is related, which we call our social space, and he calls it social reality. So what we call social reality is understood only in terms of the relations, the invisible relations. So for instance, I may be a teacher, I may be a student, I may be a brother, I may be a neighbor, right? Maybe a friendly neighbor, an unfriendly neighbor, right? I'm a consumer. When I go to a shop or a shopping mall, I'm a patient. When I go to a hospital, when I'm a tourist, when I stay in a hotel, right? Now, there are many things. So my relationship with this external world or the social world is understood in terms of my relations with others and others' relations or others' relation with me. Very interesting concept. Whereas the 20th century critic, Pierre Bourdieu, he talks about, I will skip that. If you really want to understand social space, you need to understand Bourdieu's concept of capital. How one can be, I told you about the invisible relations. For example, the relationship between economy and culture. So for instance, he says, your cultural capital can be converted into economic capital. How, for instance, we showcase our culture, Jallikattu, and lots of tourists, hundreds and thousands of tourists come to our state or flock our state during this season, during the month of January. It is also a season of holidays in the West. So a lot of people come. So what do we effectively do? We try and convert our culture into an economic gain. All the hotels are booked, hundreds of star hotels are booked, and even ordinary hotels are booked, which help the local economy to thrive. And people come. So these are some of the how one kind of capital can be converted into another kind of capital. So he talks about even social capital. As a nation, right? As a country, or as a group of people, or as a you know uh, uh, as a people group, you may produce capital. Okay, so for instance, I'll give you an example of the social capital. What is social capital? Say in Russia, recently, even before the start of the war, they were talking about social capital. What is it? Your population is your strength. In the West, the population is diminishing. Especially in Russia, the number of births is diminishing. And during the pandemic, thousands of people got killed. That means you lose people, you lose your population, that is your capital, and these people are going to generate wealth or produce wealth. More number of people with good qualification or with good knowledge, they can generate capital, they can generate wealth. If you are going to have less number of people, then you are going to produce less wealth. Now, pandemic robs people of lives. As a result, someone who is well involved or who was well involved in the production of wealth in an earning capacity, suddenly that person is lost. So there are many things to a society. So when you talk of social capital, it includes many things. So one among them is the number of people and things like that, and so many things to that. And that also includes your culture and so on. Then symbolic capital. Say they are all well distributed within the social space, and these are the things they construct the social space according to their Bourdieu. Now, there are people like a Soren Kierkegaard, a Christian existentialist. He talks, I mean, as a philosopher, he thinks in a different manner. He talks about spheres of existence or existence spheres. To him, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious spheres. So the aesthetic sphere, now our sense of beauty, that's how we build cities, we build our homes, we construct our gardens and parks. So even we design a vehicle, even we design a watch, we design a jewelry, we design a cloth. So the aesthetic, our ability to appreciate beauty, determines everything, even the way we dress every day. So now he talks about that this is an important sphere for humans because what we call our society, what we call our civilization is constructed based on our sense of aesthetic. Then the ethical sphere, a very important sphere according to him, the whole world. Now we talk about professional ethics, we talk about religious ethics, we talk about academic ethics in academic and so on. What is this ethics? It is something embedded in our language. Some of us call that conscience. Some of us call that our moral value, or some of us call that our principles. And what are they? In simpler terms, it is our ethics. And this ethical sphere makes us civilized, makes us cultured. Now, we call someone cultured. He is a very cultured person because we take into account that person's dress, language, and also, again, we take into account his conduct, his behavior, and so on. So, ethical and religious sphere, another important sphere. All of us humans who live in this world, we easily identify ourselves with fellow believers. It may cut across, say, for instance, the Buddhists, they have spread in Asia, India, elsewhere. They all identify themselves as Buddhists, or Muslims, or Christians, or Hindus. So they are spread all over the world. They are spread all over the globe. But wherever they are, now, he calls that the religious sphere because they take along with them certain ceremonies, certain practices, certain values, and so many things, and he calls them a religious sphere. Then, the one that I have given at the bottom, that is your local knowledge. So this is an important one. I'll come to that a little later. It's part of your sphere. I'll come to that. We'll take a jump and look at the mental space. Now, what is mental space? We talked about so far, we have discussed the physical space. What is this mental space? That is within us. So now look at it, a human mind. A human mind, say it is full of memories, for instance. So now I have crossed my 50s, means I have more than 50 or 55 years or more than that years of memories. Where are they located? They are there in the mental space. Maybe I have dreams. These dreams are also there in my mind. Say, if you are young, you have plenty of dreams. You keep dreaming, imagining how your life would be, how you live in future, and things like that. And you visualize everything. And all these visuals are there within your mind, and they can be located within yourself. Sometimes even the lived experiences, the memories as we call them, then the images that we carry within ourselves. So he talks about the existence of three different worlds. This is by Karl Popper. World one is the world of physical objects, events, and biological entities, the people around us, and so on. Now, the world two is, the second world is the world of mental events and objects. Even writers and scientists, they are all very good dreamers, even scientists. So before they give shape to an object, before they bring an object into the world, or they visualize everything. Mentally, they do all this. They do a lot of mental calculation and things like that. We simply call them mental events and objects. So now look at this. The third, the world number three. This is products of human mind or abstract objects like theories, formulae, learning. Even I'm talking about a subject now, that is space. This is an abstract theory or an abstract thought, but you are able to understand without even verifying what these things are, without doing any physical verification. How does that happen? This is a world which is there in your mind, which is capable of understanding all this. And he proposed that this third world is partly autonomous from other two, and that changes in world 3 can impact worlds 1 and 2 if anything changes. The other day we discussed our concept of truth. Say, and there is always a paradigm shift. Say, at one point we believe, now this is the reason for certain things. Okay, so I told you the other day about the Ptolemaic view of the planet or the world. So for a long time, people believed that to be true. Then when the Copernican view came, there was a paradigm shift. At one point, people had no knowledge of the existence of oxygen in this world. People never knew that a gas called oxygen, right? So it exists in our midst. There are so many things that exist in our midst of which we have no knowledge. We simply call them God's particle. You ask people from the Department of Physics or Chemistry, we have identified certain things and we have given them certain things, and we have also ascribed certain qualities for those things, And we have created our theories and formula based on that, which can be easily challenged at some point in future. Okay. So that is why he says, whatever happens in world 3, which exists within us, can impact worlds 1 and 2. Now, the mental space, I'll take you further. The early Freud, Sigmund Freud, he talks about, his whole conception of psychical apparatus. First, he talked about 3 distinct regions, which he called the unconscious, the pre-conscious, and the conscious. Later, he applied the terms the ego and superego, each with its own spatial separation or compartmentalization. So now, today we believe our human mind is made of ego and superego. We are not able to think beyond what Sigmund Freud has proposed. Maybe there are some other divisions also within our human mind. But today we believe these are the distinct spaces. For example, the ego is full of our sexual impulses and even other criminal and murderous impulses and so on. Okay, I'll skip Jacques Lacan now. I'll take you to another mental space proposed by Immanuel Kant. According to him, space belongs to the a priori realm of consciousness, that is, before the existence of the subject, which is very much internal, that is within our human, and it is an ideal one. So whatever we call our mental space, it is an ideal space, and which is an internal one, and also it is not graspable. We cannot grasp this because it is transcendental. It keeps changing, it keeps altering. So this space, say at one point people may subscribe to certain beliefs, certain theories, then they will make a shift. So people, they may vote for one party in an election, and in another election they may vote for another party. Their idea of a ruler, their idea of governance keeps changing. So, and accordingly, they create a space for themselves within themselves. Edmund Husserl, who proposed this whole concept of phenomenology, he talks about a transcendental subjectivity. It is not something permanent, it is transcendental, and it keeps altering and changing. Since the time is short, we'll come to the literary space. In literature, you come across space that is created by a writer. Say, we call, I used the term Clifford Gates local knowledge earlier. I would like to apply that term, Clifford Gates term, local knowledge. Every writer, when he creates a literary piece, he demonstrates to the world through his work about a particular space. Say, the pastoral space. The Roman writer Virgil, when he wrote Ecological, he was talking about a space. It may not be an ideal space, may not be a beautiful space all the time, but he wrote about the pastoral people. People like, for instance, the shepherds, the cowhands, and people who live with nature, and a world in which there are no human differences. There is no hierarchy. In this world, there are no hierarchies, and so on. Later, Edmund Spencer wrote his Shepherd's Calendar, and Sir Philip Sidney wrote his Arcadia. So we have something like bucolic poetry, idyll, and so on. It is about village, a rustic atmosphere, a bucolic ambience. Many people have written including Wordsworth and others. I'm not going into that. But there is a separate category about, this is about a writing about a particular place. The earliest one was John Denham's Cooper's Hill, a wonderful poem written in 1642. It is about a place, Cooper's Hill, a geographical reality, a physical reality. He based his poem on that Cooper's Hill. Later, Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. This is about a small village, okay? And there is this village symmetry and a churchyard. He writes about that place. Oliver Goldsmith, when he wrote Deserted Village, he was referring to a particular village in Ireland. Wordsworth, he wrote his Tintern Abbey. Matthew Arnold is a Dover Bridge. And Geoffrey Hill, he wrote his Mercian hymns. But Mercia was an imaginary place, somewhere deep in the distant history, or a place that was once had its importance in history, but that space is very much now there, but they have been converted into cities and towns. Geoffrey Hill. Then Seamus Heaney, he wrote Inlands of the Mind. So what is Inlands of the Mind? The country may be a physical reality, but it exists in your mind. So when I say that I'm an Indian, I talk about a country in which I live, in which I'm a citizen, a natural citizen, a country in which I can move about, a country in which I have my identity. I hold the passport of this country because it's a country of my birth, and I have imagined this country in my own way, in my mind. So he talks about, it's not when you create this nation in your mind, it is not similar to the other person's creation or someone else's creation. That is why he uses the term inlands of the mind, not England of the mind, inlands of the mind. Each one has his own visualization or creation. It's a creative imagination in the mind. Then many writers have handled things like Gothic, Baroque, and postmodern. We call the novels as Gothic novel, Baroque novel, postmodern novel. These are all architectural terms. For instance, in a Gothic novel, it is all about deserted graveyards, churches, churchyards, underground walls, and deserted forts with moats, then dilapidated buildings, and so on, that people believe vampires congregate or ghosts come together. And we talk about all those. The Gothic literature, basically literature of horror, Gothic, then postmodern. I'm not going to explain all this. You may be aware of some of them because the time is short. So the literary space is also a unique space. When people started using this term magical realism in the 20th century, we broke or we violated or we crossed the frontiers of real. So when you bring in magic into your narrative, and say it has been there all along in our children's literature, but in children's literature, the magic, we know it is something that is imagined, and you have all the fairies coming, angels coming, even a genie coming. So they all belong to the magical world. But in serious literature, when you try to intertwine magic, it transgresses the boundaries of what we call our physical reality. So we have this whole notion of magical realism, and boundaries are blurred and refashioned. And basically, these texts are subversive texts, and they talk about in-betweenness between the world of real and the world of magic. Those who have read J.K. Rowling's teen fiction, you know, there is this world, the magical world, and there is this world in which we live. You have to go to a railway platform, go to a particular platform, and you are transported to the magical world where even people fly on broomstick and so on. And you come across shapeshifters, you can shift your shape, you can wear a magical, invisibility cloak. That's the world of magic. And if you are going to talk about these things in the physical world, you will laugh at it, because there is nothing called invisibility cloak, which we can wear and walk around. And you cannot fly, you cannot defy gravity. It's impossible to defy gravity. And there are many things to the physical world in which we are controlled by science and reason. But the magical world is different. I have just given the names of people who coined this term, and the critics claim this has happened. That is, the metamorphosis of space to be a primary source of counter-realism. Magical realism is nothing but counter-realism. So science fiction, even fantasy fiction, we talk about different realm and space, alternative realities and parallel universe. We also use the term multiverse. So now take a look at this ecological space. Now this ecological space is interior and exterior landscape according to Barry Lopez. Barry Lopez is a very important eco critic. So according to him, there are two kinds of landscape. One is interior, the other one is exterior. That is, the exterior one is outside the self, and the interior landscape refers to the one within a person. Very often, when we examine texts from Canadian literature, people talk about this landscape. The landscape that is outside, the exterior of oneself, which is cruel, because Canada is known for its icy desert, okay, and wintry climate, and again empty landscape. See, you travel in a country like Canada or Australia, you see nothing but empty landscape. In India, if you travel, you would find people everywhere, right? Except for a few places, you find the landscape filled with people. Empty landscapes, but the interior landscape. So what is there on your mind? That matters. So this is Barry Lopez. But I'm interested in this concept of dwellers in the land. So the land, the moment you talk about the land, right, you talk about the dwellers in the land. So to know the land, we need to have knowledge of nature and human history, especially history of the place is crucial. See, in the last 10 days or so, people are trying to locate Ukraine in the world map. Where is Ukraine? In which part of the world it is located? Now, whether it is on the eastern side of Europe or on the western side of Europe or eastern side of Russia or western side of Russia, which countries surround Ukraine, right? Whether it is a landlocked country or whether it has access to the sea. So, and people are trying to locate, and every day when you watch, the invading forces, moving from different directions, you are trying to even find out the names of the cities and which part of Ukraine these cities are located and so on. As we try to do this, we also try to learn the politics of place. We become aware of the land. Say, in our syllabus, we are prescribed, we are born by Yevgeny Yevtushenko. He was a Ukrainian poet. At that time, we called him a Russian poet because Ukraine was part of Russia during the communist rule. When Russia was United Soviet Socialist Republic, Ukraine was part of Russia. In fact, most of the Ukrainians were very, very, martial-like fighters. So, and especially the Cossacks, they were known for their courage in the battlefield. They made up Russian generals and soldiers. That's a different story. Okay, so about this, here, Yevgeny Yevtushenko has written a poem called Babiar. Now, Babiar was bombed the day before yesterday by the Russian troops. When I saw it on the screen, I was shocked because Babiar was a place, it's a small ravine outside the city of Kiev, in which 100 years ago, the Jews were massacred by the Nazis. The Jews were massacred. In their memory, a memorial was built and that was in place. But that memorial building was destroyed in Russian firing. Okay. So I was a bit upset when I saw this because we teach that poem in the class for MA now. And suddenly you realize about the politics of place. Now, what do you mean by politics of place? It's not about where people live or, where a particular language is spoken and you claim that to be, especially the Donbas region of Ukraine. The Russians claim to be their own. The Crimean part of Ukraine, the Russians claim to be their own. Because these regions have a large number of Russian-speaking people and people of Russian origin. So, people make a lot of claims. So that is why we watched a civil war in Sri Lanka. That is why we have a problem in Kashmir and in other places. We call that politics of place, right? And there is something called terrain of consciousness. When you live in a land, which we also call biome, you become increasingly aware or conscious of that land or conscious of that place. An Afghan cannot think like an Indian. And a person from Tamil Nadu cannot certainly think like, let us say, a Canadian. Or let us say, someone like, a citizen of Thailand. Because this terrain consciousness there, and the mind is also a terrain of consciousness. Okay, so just the time is very short and we finish this. That is the ecological space. Then the techno space, which I spoke in detail when I referred to Arjun Appadurai and Techno State. This is also an interesting place. Jacques Lafferty uses the term mechanology. This is about science and technology and exploring the material reality of techno space, which is found in our midst. So now technology and society, they have been bracketed together for a long time. Now, we try to separate technology from its social context, but I think we'll fail in this attempt to separate technology from our social context. But at the same time, we must remember it is this technology which determines our social behavior and it affects our everyday lives. So now the techno space, though it is distinct, it is part of our social space or our living space. The next one is cyberspace. Now, what is cyberspace? Now, this is the space. Now, this cyberspace is a very important space. And today we live in a cyberspace. We call ourselves netizens. that is the citizens of the internet, and we also transport ourselves into a virtual reality. So the term appears, cyberspace appears in Neuromancer, an interesting novel, and again it is promoted by William Gibson, who wrote cyberpunk fiction and so on. So this is about a virtual landscape in which we all move in and move out. So he talks about the cyberspace, and the cyberspace is a very interesting space in the sense it is ultimately about a network or networking. Go to the bottom of this slide. You have this American cyber guru by name John Perry Barlow. Many people say it was he who at first used cyberspace to describe a network computing. It's not only our lives are networked, even all of our activities are networked. So there is an information. There is information about a person. Say it may be your bank account, it may be your your public distribution card, right? Or it may be your passport, so your Aadhaar. There are many things. Say they are all interlinked. Okay, so and today you use your mobile phone to pay money, right? To pay money, to pay your electricity bills, power bills, to pay in a petrol station, see everywhere, you live what we call electronic trade. So now this is a different space altogether where you try to connect with others and others try to connect with you. Very interesting space. Just, I have given you a list of something like a multitude of spaces. But this is another important space. I'll take just 10 more minutes before I finish because the time is short. This is pictorial space about paintings, art. So what you see in a piece of painting. For instance, Leonardo da Vinci, he called the space a mental thing or mental place. So when you say something like inner space, and when you try to decode inner space, your painting becomes nothing but a projection of the inner world, the world you conceptualize within yourself. So even you create a surreal world. I'll just show you and I'll explain, then you can understand. This is a famous painting by Picasso. The title of this painting is The Bombing of Guernica. So when General Franco was the ruler of Spain, he bombed his own people. There was a civil war in this country. This happened during the 1930s. He bombed his own people. So you can see a helpless cry of a person here. And you can also see your hearts. Maybe it is also crying in agony. Now, what's the interesting part about this painting is it has got all those jagged parts. You find cubic, you find different shapes, geometrical shapes. Perhaps you find here a right angle triangle and so on. It needs a lot of time to discuss a painting, but I'll show you certain paintings which you can understand. This is another interesting painting. This is pictorial space. Look at the hands of the girls of Avignon. In another place, they are referred to as the prostitutes of Avignon by Picasso. So in all these paintings, you come across jagged pieces. So there is more to cubism, right? So you see all that. Just I'll quickly show you a few paintings. Now, this is by the surrealist painter Salvador Dali, called The Persistence of Memory. This is about the inner space which you try to decode, where images and concepts and other things are compressed together. And when you're trying to decode them, they are not clearly compartmentalized within your mind or within your um, uh, the mental space that you have. When they find the expression, okay, maybe a wall clock that looks like a piece of leather that is hanging, and on a table you find a tree, okay, a tree denuded of leaves. So it is within you. Okay, sorry, I don't know. Maybe another day I will discuss the pictorial space. Anyway, this is just for your understanding that such a space also exists. Now, ideology, I told you in the beginning, there is this ideological space. It is a subjective thought construct rather than an objective response to economic circumstances. People think when you call an ideology, you think in terms of socialist ideology or capitalist ideology and nothing else. The whole notion of capitalist ideology or socialist ideology is based on economic condition or economic circumstances, and it is not that kind of space. Rather, Althusser, Louis Althusser, he talks in terms of ideological state apparatus, and he too talks about 8 different spheres. I'll quickly pass on. Religious sphere, educational sphere, family sphere. He also has something like legal sphere. This legal sphere is something that binds our lives, and it also excludes the common people from this sphere. Now look at the court and jurisprudence, right? And we ordinary people, we are excluded from this. When we seek justice, or when we have to clear our names, when we have to get something done, we need to have the help of lawyers. Only with their help, we can enter into the legal sphere. Of course, you can also go and argue your own case. If you are not knowledgeable about law, you cannot enter into the legal sphere. It's very much a restricted sphere, which prevents the ordinary or common people to enter into that. Then political sphere, trade union sphere, communication sphere, and cultural sphere. Now, this is ideological space. And finally, there is something called the cosmic space, outside our planet, outside our Earth, right? So the distances between planets, the distances between stars, and there are many transient phenomena like meteors, which are comets. Now, meteors, which we simply call shooting stars. This is nothing but material from outside our planet. When they enter into our planet's surface, they get burnt and appear like stars. So now, there are many things about this external cosmic space. And I already told you a lot about Nicholas Copernicus and his heliocentric theory and so on. But this cosmic space is also a very interesting space. We try to understand the distances and now and the speed with which the planets move or travel or orbit and so on. So, and using that, we try to relate ourselves with even we talk about the nearby planets where which can be traveled within 1 light year. We try to measure even the distances in terms of light and so on. So, or even galaxies moving towards us or moving away from us and so on. So, ultimately, when you talk about space, it's the whole thing. It's the universe. So, and within which we try to discover our own place, our own small place. And ultimately, someone says, I read this interesting story. How much space does a man need? This is an interesting Russian story. And ultimately, the story ends. When you die, you need a very small space, perhaps 7 into 2. 73 that you are buried. Okay, so now it's a very interesting story. How much space was that man made? Okay, now today, this is only a joke, don't get offended. Even we are trying to create walls because there is lack of space to bury people. And when someone is buried, someone else is going to be buried on top of you, and someone else is going to be buried on top of you. And in certain nations, people are buried in a standing position so that they can create more space for others. So there is a space crunch in this world. So there are a lot of things to space. And as you try and read books more on space, you will understand. And it will also sharpen your critical understanding of a text. And also it will help you to understand the creative imagination of a writer who creates such spaces to which we become, time travelers. We travel back in time if you read a historical text. So if you have read a Hilary Mantel's works, now especially about Henry VIII and his courtier by name Thomas Cranmer, you are transported in time and you go and temporarily visit those spaces which were there once and they had disappeared. Now that space is imaginatively reconstructed to us by the writer, and we love such time travel. So, and if you happen to read fantasy stories or science fiction stories, again, you start traveling, and you traverse not only via oceans and planets, you traverse galaxies and so on. So there is much to space, and you have to read and understand this entire conceptualization of space. Thank you for your patient listening. I'll take questions. If you ask me questions, you will get to know more from me. So someone has asked me this question, and that is from Rasi Anugraha. How do spaces and zones differ, sir? Okay. Now, zones are within space, right? Now, when we talk about economic zone, okay, this is about a particular region or a particular place. Say, at one point, what we call European Union, it was European Economic Union. So it was an economic union which went on to become a military alliance, where the entire Europe have become joined, almost entire Europe have joined the military alliance called the NATO. Then we also talk in terms of climate zones. There are different climate zones like a temperate zone, cold zone, and Arctic zone and things like that. Zones are regions with fluid boundaries, of course. Suddenly a region can become very cold. Say, for instance, you go to Delhi, depending on the time of the year, it will become a very cold zone, or it will become a very hot zone. So now when you use the term zone, it refers to a region, almost it refers to a region where a particular economic activity happens, or a particular political activity happens, or where you can locate a climate activity, or a climatic zone. So zone means it's a smaller region, whereas space means it includes everything. So that is why we use terms like sphere, then we use a term like site, we use a term like domain, right? We have a term like field and many such things. Any other question? Let me see the messages, only these messages. Or do I have any questions? Okay, it's up to the admin. Can you hear me, all of you? Yeah. If there are questions, I will take them.
We have a question here, sir.
Yeah.
Can we relate stream of consciousness with mental world too?
Can we connect the
Relate stream of consciousness with mental world too?
Okay, that's by Karl Popper's mental world. Okay, now, no, I'm not talking about connecting stream of consciousness is a literary technique. Okay, so our human mind is not neatly compartmentalized. You need to understand. As you are listening to me, perhaps you may be wondering when this man will stop this talk. When can I go home? Or where did I leave my bag? Well, there are so many things clouding your mind. In a stream of consciousness technique, what the character effectively does, or the writer effectively does, is allowing the character to record everything that runs in one's mind without any inhibition, without barring anything. So, if you happen to read Ulysses, you come across characters, including Molly Bloom and others. So, now, she slips into a reverie, Molly Bloom. And there are many things that come one after another. At one moment, she thinks about her lover, and another moment, next, what happens next is she thinks about the house keeping or cleaning, then about the street. So one after another, which comes, they all appear to be, seemingly unrelated, but related to each other or one another in the sense they all are the private experiences of a person. It may be memory, it may be dream, or it may be pure imagination, but each one remains indistinguishable from the other. Well, to a certain extent, you can relate it to world 2, because which remains very much your own private world. Say, how many of us can, even in spite of our close relationship, though we claim that we can easily read the other person's mind, how many of us can effectively know what runs in the mind of a person who sits next to you or who listens to you? No, it's very much a private world. This is what people call interiority. Can we associate scape with the globalization? Another question. Now, globalization happens. See, what kind of globalization are we talking about? Whether it is technology-based globalization or economy-based globalization, people have ruled out that there cannot be anything called culture-based globalization. For a very long time, the Westerners have tried to dominate the world, and they try to control the world with their own culture and so on. It did not succeed. Okay, so even Hollywood films are trying to promote Western culture on a large scale at a global level, with the Hollywood films getting screened in China, Russia, Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, even in islands, far up Pacific Ocean islands, and so on. But that kind of globalization never happened. Okay, so it is a trade and economy. That is one form of globalization, but we know there are different economic orders in the world. China has a different economy. In India, we have this mixed economy where the state enterprises also coexist with the private enterprises. So, though we have trade and commerce, that is one form of globalization. But economic pattern or order differs from nation to nation. It cannot be uniform throughout the world. So in a way, globalization tried to create some form of uniformity. But you are right in a way, in the sense, we have created scapes, different scapes or spheres of influence, okay, in different parts of the world, which may be part of your globalization effort. So, for example, we call certain nations as banana republics. Where only bananas grow, especially many countries in the West, in the Caribbean islands and elsewhere. They are all under the powerful hegemony of America. They vote for America and Western nations in the United Nations. They cannot think independently. They cannot act independently. Their currency doesn't quote against the dollar much, and they don't have industries, nothing. So whatever these powerful nations dictate them, they listen to them quietly. So now these are all nations which are under the sphere of influence of bigger nations. And these nations also establish a kind of control over their economy and a kind of control over their social life and so on. But the term globalize, right, which cannot become the order. To a certain extent, technological globalization is happening, or to a greater extent, I would say. For example, we have the 5G. Now we are talking, we talked about 4G and 5G, and people talk about 6G also. Now, which integrates our world. So people from across the regions, they shift from 3G technology to 4G to 5G and so on, and the speed of interconnectivity. And also, we also, embrace this technology in such a manner, a kind of globalization is possible, and it has become possible. Technology-based globalization is possible. In the past, we had time for transfer of technology from one country to another or from one region to another. It took even 10 years or 20 years for a technology to get transferred because they were all patented and you had to pay money and you cannot transfer technology. Now today, it's not the case. So the moment that China introduces 5G, an African country goes and buys this technology, and immediately you have 5G connectivity in that country, and 5G technology is used in that country. So globalization, right, is a reality, but to a certain extent. In certain cases, to a greater extent. In certain cases, to a smaller extent. Anyone? Yes.
I think we are done with the questions, sir.
Any other question?
Okay.
Okay.
Any other question?
I think
we are done, sir.
Okay, fine.
I think we can end it.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. The wonderful insights on both the days. And it was very comprehensive and amply illustrated. And all of us here at Bishop Heber and from other universities and colleges would have definitely benefited from your lectures. Thanks so much, sir. Thank you very much for your time, especially, and for your insights. Thank you, participants, for your continued support. You are the motivation for us to run more such FTPs in future. Thank you so much, participants. Here are a few announcements. Please stay on.
You can send your papers to our in-house journal, Literary Explorer. It is an ISSN registered journal. The papers will be subject to scrutiny by a jury. Your articles can be around 3,000 words and it must adhere to the 8th MLA edition. The articles can be sent to listexplorer66@gmail.com. It is found in the chat box. You can see it in the chat box. And another important announcement, tomorrow's session begins at 6 p.m. and we hope you join by time tomorrow. Thank you.
Tomorrow's session begins at 6 tomorrow. So do join us.
Please join on time tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.